So I'm recording. The message will come up in a second. And it's great to have Mrs. Baker here, who you know really well, from Careers Wales, and she's going to help you with all the different aspects of writing a CV. So we've got people here who might be thinking of applying for part-time jobs, apprenticeships, school leavers programs, or just good to have a CV ready for, you know, even if they go to uni in terms of getting part-time jobs and stuff. So it's really useful to have them as well. So, okay, we'll get started.
Great. So as Dr. Rose said, today we're just going to look at good hints and tips on how to produce a good CV. And Dr. Rose writes, it can help you in all manner of different situations once you leave school, not just for applying for job roles. It can help with college application forms, apprenticeships and things like that. So what your CV is it's a way that you can attempt to sell yourself to an employer when you're competing against other applicants. You're trying to get that employer to take notice of your CV. You want them to look at it and go, oh, that's a good one. I'd like to interview that person. So the challenge you've got in writing a CV, especially if you've never done something like this before, or especially if you haven't got sort of that kind of experience and previous work experience and things like that, it can be really difficult to look at a CV and think, well, how can I make myself sound employable? How can I make myself sound more appealing than the next person? And how can you then captivate those people that are sifting through hundreds of CVs to make yours stand out? So that's what we're going to look at today. So one of the most important things to remember is that your CV has one aim at the end of the day, and that is to get you an interview. It is this first point where you are interacting with an employer. So you send in your CV and they are reading it, and if they get a good feeling from it, they will invite you for an interview. So you need that CV to be captivating so that you do get that interview. So when you're writing your CV, it's important then that it's presented professionally and clear and shows that you're the ideal person for the job and that you have the right skills, the relevant experience or achievements, and the qualifications required. Now, if you've never done a CV before, that might sound really overwhelming and thinking, well, how do I do that? So that is the point of today. We're going to look and break it down so that going forward, you know exactly what people are looking for in CVs. And the last thing is the right attitude. You want to present yourself in such a positive manner that it comes across in your CV that you've got the right attitude to go into a job and work hard. So things that you need to put on your CV are skills.
Mrs. Baker, sorry to interrupt. We can't see the PowerPoint at the moment. Are you sharing the PowerPoint? We showed it before. No, not at the moment.
Right, okay. If I'll stop sharing my screen and then I'll try and do it again in the hope that
it did work the first time when we had it up on the screen. It did work, so it will work, I'm sure.
Right, can you see it now?
No, we're just seeing the DB.
Right, okay, let's have a look. Right, if I stop sharing it again, what I might do is leave from my other email address and hope that that works. Right, has that worked now?
At the moment, we're still saying that we're not seeing anything, just your DB on the screen. Okay. So it might be, I don't know if it is to do with the fact you've got the two screens.
Yeah, I've left the one call, so it should. Is my camera off and on? Right. Let's try it a different way.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Is that working now?
Yeah, see that fine.
Right, so sorry about that. Right, so when you are starting to write your CV, there's things that you need to look at and think about that you have. As it says in front of you, skills, experience, qualification. Now, some of you may not have these skills and experiences, and what that means is it's about looking at what we call transferable skills. So it's looking at those skills, achievements, experiences that you've had throughout your school life and how you can transfer that into sounding desirable on a CV. So things like during Welsh Back, when you've had to do certain points of work where you work as a team, you can mention all those kinds of things and say, well, actually, in my Welsh Back lesson, I had to work with other people to make a presentation. And that's what transferable skills are. It's looking at what you've done in the past and how you can use that for something that you're going to do in the future. So some of the things that the wording that you might use are things like you're able to follow instructions. So again, you do that every day in school. Good communication skills. So if you've ever presented anything, then you can say that you have good communication skills. Things like work experience, whether that's within school, if you're in the sixth form and you've gone on work experience previously, or you've had some form of work experience outside of school. So that could be helping with a family business, it could be babysitting, it could be coaching like younger teens through sports and things like that. You can also list any qualifications that you have. So those of you in year 11 who might be thinking, well, I haven't got any qualifications. If you've sat any GCSEs in year 10, then they count. If you've ever done music grades or dance grades or anything like that, then they will also count towards your qualifications. And then you can also look at things outside of school that you may have done or been involved in, like different sports or clubs. And then your attitude. So this is where you need to sell yourself and say positive things about yourself. So things like, you're keen to learn, you're dedicated, you're trustworthy, you've got a positive attitude. And again, you can bring in examples of this. So I'm really motivated. I always hand my schoolwork in on time. I always complete my homework, things like that. You can use examples of in school to help you with your job application. So I think we touched on this a little bit earlier about when will you actually use your CV. And yes, it is for applying for jobs, but there's lots of other examples and situations where using a CV can be really important. So as you said, job application forms, the majority of employers will ask for a copy of your CV. If you are applying for a job, when you do send in your CV, it's really important that you provide a covering letter. So a covering letter is basically just like if you were writing an email, you just say, to whom it may concern, please find attached the application form for whatever job it might be, and just a little bit about why you're applying for that job role. When employers read the covering letter, that will prompt them to whether or not they would want to read your CV or not. So in some instances, your CV may not even be looked at if you haven't got a good covering letter. So application forms. Your CV will help you complete application forms by providing all the details and dates of your education and employment. Now, application forms can be for many different things. It can be if you're applying for college, if you're applying for apprenticeships, if you're applying for a job role, and some jobs will actually ask for you to complete an application form as opposed to sending in your CV. So in that instance, your CV will act as a reminder when you're completing that application form. And then a speculative approach. So this is where you just go and hand out your CVs. So a lot of people will, say, oh, just go and leave your CV in a shop, or some shops you might go into and say, oh, have you got any job roles going? And they might just say, oh, leave us your CV. So it's always useful to have some copies and an up-to-date CV on the off chance that should you ever need it. And then telephone contact. So this is a fairly new thing in the last few years, that a lot of employers, before interviewing you in person, they will actually offer you a telephone interview. And if you were ever offered a telephone interview, having your CV to hand as a point of reference will help you in that interview, because employers will quite often pick up on things that you've put in your CV and they will ask you about it in an interview. And the last thing is that your CV can help you with interview preparation. So in an interview, you wouldn't actually have your CV to hand. However, just before your interview, it's always worth sort of going over your CV just to remind yourself of the points you've made and some of the things that you've said. So one thing to remember before you start putting a CV together is that the average employer is inundated with applications. For every one job role, it attracts a significant number of applications, with some roles attracting hundreds. So as an example, there was a job with a healthcare company for a junior psychologist. So they were looking for a graduate. There was one job role in Cardiff, and it was advertised across the whole of the UK. And for that one job role, they had over 500 applications from psychology graduates. So you really need your CV to stand out, because especially if you're leaving university and applying for graduate roles, you could be competing against hundreds of other people. But most employers don't even read your full CV and will skim picking sections of information out. So on average, a prospective employer will spend around 10 seconds looking at a CV. So, 8 seconds. So it doesn't really sound like a lot. So let's have a look at maybe how much information you think that you can pick out within 8 seconds. So let's go. And that is it. That is how long an employer will spend looking at your CV. So do you think that was a long time, or do you think it was quite quick, and so it was very difficult to pick out large sections of information? For most people, 8 seconds isn't a lot. And if you've got a CV that is full of information, they're not going to find that information because they haven't got the time to go looking through all these different sections. So that brings us to, what should you include in your CV? So to start off, your contact details. So your full name, address, phone number, and email address. Now with your email address, make sure that it's something that's appropriate and that you actually use. So next, you would be looking at your personal profile. So this is a short statement about you and your qualities and goals. So it should be just a very short paragraph. And this is where those words that we looked at earlier, like motivated and things like that, will come in. This is where you need to use those positive words and really sell yourself. When you're filling in your personal profile, the best thing that you can do is have the job description from the employer, if there is one, next to you, so that you can look at what they're looking for in the job description and write that into your personal profile. Which means that, unfortunately, when you're applying for different job roles, you may need to slightly adjust the information that's in your CV. So the next thing you need to put in is work experience or employment. And you work your way down of different jobs that you've had, and give brief details of the role, including duties and responsibilities that you may have. If you have got no work experience or no previous employment, then just leave it out. It's not the end of the world if it's not in there. And then you need to move on to your skills section. So this allows you to specify particular skills that you have. This section, you're better off bullet pointing it so that when they are looking in that 8 seconds, they can see very clearly and concisely what you feel your best skills are. So skills, you need to put things like able to work independently, able to work quickly, all those kinds of things that you feel are the skills that you have and you would bring to that job role. So next, you need to move on to your kind of achievements, interests, hobbies. This is where you sell yourself. This is where you talk about the type of person that you are, the things that interest you, what motivates you. This is the biggest section that you'll have. This is where you include any voluntary work that you've done, any hobbies that you have, anything that you engage with outside of school. If you don't think that you've got anything to put in this section, then leave it out. You're better off not putting it in than trying to pretend that you do all these things when you don't. Next is education or training and any qualifications that you've had. So this is where you put your GCSEs, your A-levels, any sort of formal qualifications that you have. If you go on to university or an apprenticeship, as you get older, you will start adding those qualifications once you get them. If you're a year 11 and you've just turned 16 and you're applying for your first job roles, creating that first CV, put any GCSEs that you received in year 10. And then if you've received any qualifications outside of school, whether that's through things like, as I said earlier, through dance classes, through music, if you don't have any qualifications, put your education in, and then you could put a little bit about predicted grades and a little bit about what you're doing in school, just to show them that, you know, you're hardworking and you're working towards achieving certain qualifications. So the last bit on your CV is references. Most employers will accept a CV that just says references available on request. At some point, you would need to provide a reference if you were given the job, but when you're writing your CV, there's no point stressing yourself out trying to think of references. But when you do get to that stage where you do need to provide them with referees, what you could be looking at is sometimes somebody in school, one of the like a head of year, but it's always, you always must check with them first before just putting anybody's name down. You could also look at if you're involved with any clubs or charities or anything like that outside of school, you can use them as a referee. You can also use if you've done any volunteering work, if you've done any work for like babysitting in the community. But a referee ideally should be somebody who's known you for a significant length of time. So when they say that, they mean around a year or two or more. So it can't just be somebody that you met the other week. It would be somebody who would be able to speak to your character. So this is just an example of a very basic CV of somebody who has just finished school. So this is more year 11s, year 12s who may not have had previous jobs. This is the kind of detail and size that you would need to put into a CV. And as you can see, it's very short, it's very straightforward. You don't need to put a ton of detail into it. The less you put in and the more concise it is, the better it's going to be when those employers are sifting through those CVs. So as you can see, this person, they've put about their school work experience, they've put some very basic GCSEs in, and then just a little bit about themselves. And that is more than enough. The next thing to talk about is social media. And not everyone thinks that social media and jobs and CVs sort of go hand in hand. But these days, employers will check your social media, and they will, before they even offer you a job, they will search for you on social media. And that is because they're searching for things that they would find offensive, that doesn't represent their company. So 70% of employers these days have said that they check for an online presence with any prospective employees. 71% of those said that they would be turned off and would not offer a job to somebody who posted posts on social media of a sexual nature. 65% of them said that they would be turned off by the use of bad language. 61% by poor spelling or grammar. 51% by references to violence. 47% are turned off by photos of consuming alcohol. So if you've got any photos of you at a party on a Saturday night drinking, then that could turn off any prospective employers. And then 83% said that they would not offer a job to somebody who made references about using illegal drugs on their social media. Now, those of you that are looking in the future to going on to more professional roles, if you need to be a part of a registered body, so if you're a teacher, a social worker, a doctor, a nurse, an engineer, a police, anything like that, you could lose your professional registration, so you could lose your job based on what you put on social media. So before you apply for these job roles, you should get into a good habit of just going through your social media and clearing out anything you don't think that you wouldn't want anybody to see. There's been instances of nurses losing their pins because of photos of them appearing drunk on social media. And you also need to be mindful of how you present yourself and how you might speak about other people. There was an incident about 2 years ago where a group of friends in a private WhatsApp group, so they never thought that this would get out, and they were 4 friends, and one of them was a police officer. And in this private chat, they were speaking very derogatory about somebody who they went to school with. And some way or another, those messages got shared with that person, and he made a complaint to the police force, and that police officer lost his job over a private conversation with his friends, but his tone and the language that he used in that message meant that he was sacked for misconduct. So if you're going into any of these kinds of roles where you need to be seen as a figure in the community and professional, you need to be very, very mindful of what you're putting on social media and things that you might say to other people. So when you're writing your CV, this is the checklist that you need. Keep it short, no more than 2 A4 pages, and make sure that it is easy to read. Don't overcrowd the document. You don't need to put your whole life story into the CV. Employers, they expect your CV to be on good quality paper, so just make sure it's printed nicely on nice, thick, uncrumpled white paper. Use clear headings, bullet points, and an easy to read font. Don't try and be fancy and clever by adding all these lovely fonts. Very basic font is all that you need. Check your spelling, grammar, and punctuation. And always get somebody else to check it for you, because somebody else will pick up on something that you might not have. And writing CV at the top is optional. You don't have to put it. Remember to keep it up to date. So every time you change job, you change your address, you change your phone number, you gain a new qualification, always remember to update your CV, because the last thing you want is to apply for a job and then you're spending a few hours, as well as trying to apply for the job, updating your CV because it's a year or 2 out of date. And always send a covering letter. It's just a very short letter explaining why you're applying for the job, why you want the job, and a little bit about some of the experience that you have that is relevant, but you don't need to put too much in because they will get that later on from your CV. And don't put anything that isn't true. Don't try and sell yourself up. Just be yourself. Put your own experiences, your own achievements in, because the employer wants to know about you and not who you're trying to be. And lastly, if you do get help with writing your CV, if mum, dad, a teacher, anybody says, oh, I'll help you, I've written one before, make sure that you go over it yourself, because sometimes other people can adapt how you've written it, and that doesn't quite sound like you. And so you could find yourself in an interview where the employer is asking you about a section of your CV, and you may not understand the way that it's been phrased, and then they will know that you haven't written that yourself, and that casts doubt on everything else that you've said and put into your CV. So if somebody helps you, just make sure that it's written in your own way and in a way that you can understand. And remember, if it doesn't look professional, they probably won't even look at it. If you're applying for a particular job, check your CV against the job description to make sure the skills are covered. So a lot of job descriptions will have bullet points of the specific skills that are required for that job. So when you're adapting your CV for that job role, you can adapt your skills to fit what they're looking for in the person for that job. And as always, and I say it on everything that I send out, if you ever need any support with anything, writing a CV, application forms, then please just drop me an email or come and see me.
That's fantastic.
Always happy to help.
So have we got any questions for Mrs. Baker now? Because I've got a few questions that people ask me all the time. But I'll start off, and then if anyone's got any questions, we can put them in the chat. Now, sometimes if you look on CVs and resumes, especially in America, it's very common to see like photos on CVs, you know, like the photo. But it's not something, is that something that in the UK doesn't tend to happen? You don't tend to put a photograph of yourself on a CV?
No, not in the UK. We seem to be very, very professional. It's white paper, black ink, straight to the point.
Cool. And the other thing is, obviously, you said about references. Now, lots of people, in terms of school, if you're in sixth form, I tend to do all the references if you apply for part-time jobs and all sorts of things like that. So a typical thing for me would be someone would email me yesterday night. Somebody emailed me and said, Dr. O, and they left in 2018. So we still do them if you leave. And they said, I've got a new job now. They're going to ask me for references. Can I put you down for a reference? And then this morning I had the email through asking to the reference and I completed it. So that's the usual way to do it. Do some people, Mrs. Baker, put the details of the referees on the CV, or is it usually now they would just say references on request?
It's a mixture of both. I would always say your best option would be to put references on request, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you've put the reference down. As an example, Dr. O, it could be yourself. That person hasn't spoken to you in a year. They email you and you could be, for whatever reason, not in work or not able to do it. And so then the company is having to chase them up again for a different referee. So I would always, in the first instance, put references available on request, because that gives you the time to speak to those referees just to ensure that they are happy for you to put their details forward. But if you have got two references that you think, if it's a family friend or anything like that, and they're more than happy, you can put them straight away. But I would definitely double check before putting anybody's name down on a job application form or CV as a reference.
Absolutely. And from someone that does a lot of referees, it is really nice when somebody emails you first, because you just don't know the circumstances, you know. And if you just get an email out of the blue and it's somebody you haven't seen for a long time, you don't know, you want to talk to them and say, look, I've just had this, because you don't know if it's a genuine request.
Yeah.
A lot of the time I get asked for details of qualifications, and very often I get asked to verify people's qualifications, and I really shouldn't be giving that unless I know that the person's given permission for their grades. So it's really important that you let your referee know. Now, the other thing that people do a lot miss, which I have to tell them about, is that they say, Dear Dr. O, I'm applying for a job. Please, can you send me a reference? Right? Now, obviously, you can't have the way it works is you have to give my details or the referee's details, and then a company will normally have a pro forma, a form that they send to you to complete. All right? You can't they don't want you as the person to send them the reference, because you could have written it yourself, right? The idea is that it comes via me from a proper school email address, not something that says, oh, here's what Dr. O wrote about me. You can't do that. So that's something else to mention about that. So
Yes.
if you've got any questions about CVs, it could be anything, what to include. It could be, I know it was a really comprehensive talk from Mrs. Baker. Put them in the chat now, and Mrs. Baker will do her best to answer them. Okay, so I'm just going to watch the chat now in case we've got any questions. What I thought was, and I'm not surprised by how it's the time, isn't it? How such a short amount of time to people look at them. That's the shocking thing, really, isn't it? Because you spend a long time. People will spend a long time in these documents, but people are very busy, and they tend to just flick through them.
Yeah, and that's it. You could spend, as you said, quite a long time, and you can put quite a lot of effort into writing these CVs. So to think that somebody spends less than 10 seconds glancing over it very quickly, you know, before I came to work for Careers Wales in a previous job that I had, I spent a couple of weeks in HR, and I was told we had hundreds of application forms for this one job. And the head of that department basically said to me, if they have not got a first class honours degree, just delete their CV. And that was their way of sifting it. So a lot of these companies will just have very strict criteria of what they're looking for before they even look at your CV. So it's very difficult to think that you put so much effort and time into writing it, and it's down to what that person is looking at or looking for on the day as to whether or not they even glance at your CV. I mean, part-time jobs and things like that are completely different. They will tend to look at those CVs, but especially like graduate CVs, they get so many application forms for them that they can be quite strict in how they whittle those down.
I can't, stress enough what Mrs. Baker said about the social media thing. Okay, I've had loads of students in the sixth form that have gone to interviews, right? And they've even said to them about things about social media and and they've said, look, we representing a company here. Have you got please, you've got to be respectful if you come here. Well, are you aware of that? And they've talked to them at an interview about, they've not singled out their social media sites, but they've said there. And it's made our students think, oh, have they looked at my social media? Have they checked me up on Facebook? Have they Googled you? If you Google the name, what comes up? Okay, so you've just got to be really, really careful, right? In terms of that. We haven't got any questions at the moment, so that's fine. But remember, you can ask. It's a good opportunity now to ask any questions to Mrs. Baker about. It could be things that you could include. It could be a question. Think, should I include this? I mean, some of the dangers. When I see CVs, some of the things that I see, which from really good students, is that they've done so much. They try to cram everything into a CV, and what they try and do to get it 2 pages, miss, they do really small font, and they try and make they make the margins really thin. And you've got to remember the CV is just you're trying to catch their eye. It's got to be something. You're not going to put your entire history down. You're going to select some of your achievements that best represent you.
Yeah.
So that you can have an interview. You want to be able to talk to them at an interview. You might have a letter of application alongside it. It's just doing that.
Yeah, you don't need to put everything. If you're applying for, as an example, a job in a nursery and you've got experience of babysitting and things like that, then put that in. But they don't need to know that when you were in year 10 you climbed Pen Van, because that then isn't relevant. So it's making that judgment of, if you've got tons of information to put into those personal statements and things like that, just whittle it down into what you think will interest them and what is relevant for that job role.
The other thing I've seen before on a CV, and I don't know if this is good practice or not, I've seen someone struggling, right? So let's say, for example, well, I'll give an example where it might be useful, but if you see it, so they put their CV together, and let's say they're a very creative person, they might have put a link in the CV to a web page they have that shows examples of their work and stuff. So they might be a musician, and they might say, well, actually, rather than trying to do this, click here to hear my recent recordings or stuff like that. Is that becoming more common, people doing that?
It is becoming more common, especially in the sort of more creative pathways where people are trying to share content and examples. The one thing I would bear in mind is that companies will quite often print out the CVs.
Yeah.
So you may be not putting information onto a CV because you've shared a digital link, but if they've printed it out, they're not going to have access to that. It can be worth checking with the company and saying, a lot of companies welcome you when you're applying for the job, for you to give them a call and say, I'm applying for this job. Is it okay? I'm just checking before I put this link in whether that would be okay. And they would then be able to say to you, well, actually, we print out all our CVs, so that would give you an idea of whether or not it would work. But it is definitely becoming more common, as I said, especially in the creative sector, things like musicians, architects, artists, things like that. They are using digital platforms to share their work as a kind of online portfolio when applying for those job roles.
And the other thing about it is, one thing that I may have missed this, Mister, I apologize if you said it, you've got to be really careful when you put your contact details down that your email address is sensible, okay?
Yes.
Because even on the UCAS website where you put your details down applying for university, we have some really silly emails and we're saying, look, this is not the impression you want, and you could have something like, your email address could be crazysue@hotmail.com, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, or love to party at something, right? You've got to be really careful not to, but you need just a very basic, bland, boring email address, all right? That, and even create one, create a Google account or Hotmail account, just so that it's a nice, plain, and you might want to do that as a professional one. You might want to keep your professional application separate from your personal email address.
Yes,
okay, that
definitely.
might be a good thing to do in terms of that. The other thing I was going to ask is, I've seen a few, not many doing this, but obviously it's something that older people do. They will have like these LinkedIn accounts, won't they, in terms of professional networking.
Yeah.
But I have seen a few younger people, right, who are just sort of year 13 or applying afterwards, doing those sort of networks. Is that something that's becoming more common?
Yeah, we've seen it more with graduates. A lot of graduates are coming out of university and going on LinkedIn to try and find those graduate roles. So I can understand how, if that filters down to sort of year 13 that are looking for job roles, a lot of companies do search for staff on digital platforms. What we tend to find is they are geared towards the more professional roles, as I said, looking more for graduates and things. But there'd be no harm in sort of year 13s, especially if they're looking for apprenticeships, to create a LinkedIn account and maybe start following some of those companies that offer apprenticeships that they may feel that they would like to apply for. Definitely. Touching back on your email addressing, one thing to remember is don't use your school one, because people use it and then they leave school and the email address isn't active, and then they apply for a CV and apply for a job, and those jobs are emailing their school email address. We've seen that before as well.
And the other thing I'd mention is, be very careful if you're applying for jobs in the summer, that you make sure that you make it, because sometimes companies will write, if they email me in the summer, I pick up my emails. But imagine if they send a letter asking for a reference in the summer holidays. You've got to try and communicate to the company to basically do it via email or something, because it's no good emailing right into a school in the summer holidays where that mail might not be picked up because there won't be staff working. So you've got to be aware of things like that. So that's why it's important to let your referee know that you put them down. So if somebody emailed me and said, like, I'm applying for this job, I would say, make sure they contact me via email.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I will pick up that email and I will be able to respond to it. So you don't miss out on that opportunity because someone didn't do your reference.
And they will pass on that. They will quite often give you an offer of a job role subject to your references. And if they can't get hold of those references, or they can't get hold of you for an alternative reference, they will move on to somebody else. And, you could risk losing that job offer.
Because the student I did a reference for today that left in 2018, they already have been offered the job. It's a matter of me doing the references as confirmation because they like the person. and it's just the final thing. Now, if I didn't do that reference, that job wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've got to, it's important that you communicate with your referee and that you communicate with the people you're applying to, and you know, that you get their right email address, you get their right contact, you get their right title in the organization. Okay, and then very often, as you said, we'll ask, how do you know that person? So you would,
Yeah.
so a teacher is often a very good person because they know it's a professional relationship, rather than saying, oh, this is a person they put the details on. You need to, they need to know what the relationship is to you. It could be a relative of yours, couldn't it? So you need to sort of make it clear. That's why lots of people will use teachers, or when they go to university, lecturers, or people that know them in a professional basis. If you've got a part-time job already, obviously they know you from an employment thing, and therefore, you know, that would be a person. But it all depends what you're applying for. Like if you're working at Domino's as your part-time job, and then you suddenly apply for a sort of a full-time position related to your academic subjects in school, yeah, well, obviously the teachers are going to be the best thing to do. But if you're applying for another part-time job, well, your reference writer may well be the person, your previous boss.
Yeah, certain jobs, sometimes they look for a status behind that referee, and having a teacher or a lecturer or something like that gives that status, because they do view it as a more professional reference, as opposed to, as you said, maybe the 21-year-old manager from Domino's. Unfortunately, there is that kind of examples where having a teacher or somebody in a more professional job role can help strengthen, I guess, who the reference is coming from.
Absolutely. And the argument is that if you pick, for example, a teacher, if you pick Mr. Hardy, if you don't go on to sixth form, you know, they've known you for a substantial amount of time, okay, and can talk about your strengths, yeah, and you know, and what you can bring to different positions. Whereas it all depends on what you're applying for. You can make a judgment based on what you're applying for, who would be better. Is it someone in a part-time job, or is it somebody that's known you in school in a more academic setting? It all depends what you're applying for in terms of that.
Yes.
Well, there's no questions in the chat, and I understand that some people don't want to do that. So if there's no questions, we're going to bring an end to the meeting. But if you've got any questions, you're more than welcome to email me or Mrs. Baker. Obviously, yeah. Mrs. Baker is the expert on CVs and covering letters, and I can only do it from sort of my perspective. So, but please feel free to email us, and we'll do our best to help you.
Yeah, I've sent it out. A couple of sixth formers who've previously emailed me asking for help on their CV. I've put like a guide together, like a step-by-step guide. So if you are applying for a job, then just drop me an email and I can send that guide over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, everyone, for coming. Thanks, Mrs. Baker, for doing this. It's brilliant. And what I'll do is I'll put a copy of this video on our YouTube channel.
No problem at all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.